Welcome to another quiet journey through the long corridors of the past. Tonight, we'll step softly into a world behind stone walls and heavy oak doors, a place where silence was sacred, time was measured by the bells, and life moved to the rhythm of prayer, ritual, and quiet endurance. This is not a tale of queens and crusaders. Tonight, you'll meet women whose names were often forgotten, where cool stones and candlelight define the edges of a medieval nun's world, whose lives were devoted to faith, whose voices were confined to whispered chants and parchment letters. Or perhaps you are just a girl who was sent here, perhaps the youngest daughter of a minor noble family, promised to the church before you could even speak your name. The chanting begins. Low, monotonous Latin phrases repeated again and again. Sext, nun vespers. And finally, compline when the sun is gone and shadows lengthen in the cloister walk. Spinning wool, copying texts in a scriptorium where light is scarce and posture is pain. Tending herbs for the infirmary, weeding the garden. Conversations are limited to designated times or whispered notes passed in Latin, the official language of prayer. Many convents used hand signs to communicate during silent hours. You learn to express joy, worry, fatigue with a flick of fingers or the raising of brows. Rivalries surface in subtle ways, in shared glances, in the distribution of chores. Some women are gentle and kind, a noble daughter forced to give up fine silks and riding horses, a peasant girl seeking shelter after a bad harvest, a simple wooden bed, a chest, a small writing board. You grow used to the quiet. You learn the rules by heart. Shared warmth beside the hearth, a borrowed book, the sudden, unexpected joy of music echoing down a hallway, a sister who touches your hand as she passes. You anticipate the ringing of the bell before it sounds. And one day, you wake and realize the world outside has faded. This is your world now. Sometimes a crucifix, always a candle. The walls absorb your breath, your prayers, your dreams. Here, they become equals in their vows, if not in their hearts. Not freedom, perhaps, but purpose, and that, for many, was enough. Others harsh, driven by rigid piety. Each carries her own burden, her own private surrender, or helping in the kitchen. The rhythm of your work mirrors the rhythm of your prayer. Round and round, the wheel turns. These are the hours, each punctuating a day that otherwise stretches unbroken. Barley gruel, perhaps a piece of coarse bread, some dried peas or onions, watery ale for drink. On feast days, you might taste fish or cheese. On fast days, and there are many, even these are absent. Hunger dulls, but never quite disappears. It lingers, like the cold. The rhythm is comforting. It is the rhythm of survival. Many were given as tithe offerings to secure the salvation of a family's soul, or to remove one more mouth from a dining hall in lean winters. A moment of beauty can anchor you for a whole week. You'll also hear of one extraordinary woman who broke through those stone barriers with her visions and her voice. What might have been, had you not taken the veil? To run barefoot in grass, to dance in a village square, to fall in love. These thoughts must be pushed aside, but they always return. Let your mind slow as we enter a cloister. Let's begin. The first of 7 daily prayers. You light a taper and walk quietly through the silent corridor to the chapel. The chill in the air is heavy with stone and wax. Your breath mists slightly as your rough woolen habit brushes against the worn flagstones. Why, it sucked to be a medieval nun. Imagine waking before dawn every day. The room around you is cold, not the crisp chill of a morning breeze, but the kind that clings to the stone walls, no scent of flowers or perfume, no fabric softer than woolen habit. There is only duty, there is only God. Sinks into your bones and never quite goes away. The walls of your cell are plain, and the single narrow window lets in only a hint of grey light. You rise from a straw mattress covered in plain linen, and the floor greets your bare feet with a biting chill. There is no mirror. You are a nun. The bell tolls matins. The chapel is dim, lit only by oil lamps and candles on the altar. Throughout the day, the bells will ring again and again. Lauds at dawn, prime in the early morning, terse before midday. Between the prayers lies labor. The food is plain. Silence is expected. In the garden, you may notice the first crocus blooming after frost, or the shimmer of rain on stone steps. These small things become enormous, sometimes when you are alone. Forbidden thoughts drift in. Nuns are not immune to emotion. Some joined willingly. Visionaries, widows, women fleeing dangerous marriages. Others, less so. The cell is your home. Years pass, and strangely, it is not as empty as it once seemed. It is filled with small kindnesses. In the stillness, you find something else. Let us shift our gaze from the quiet cell to a brilliant mind that refused to be silenced. Hildegard of Bingen was born in 1098 in the Rhineland, in what is now Western Germany. She was the 10th child in a noble family, and, as was common, the 10th child was often promised to the church. At the age of 8, Hildegard was sent to the Benedictine monastery at Dissipol. Her visions were accompanied by richly colored illustrations, often showing radiant figures, heavenly spheres, and mysterious forms. These were not mere dreams. They were, in her words, direct experiences of divine light. There, she was enclosed with an anchoress named Jutta von Sponheim. Her texts, Physica and Cassie et Cure, explore herbal remedies, the four humours, the properties of stones and plants, and the relationship between body and spirit. Her approach was holistic. She believed illness stemmed from imbalance in both the soul and the body. Pope Eugenius III read a portion of Sivius and granted his blessing. For Hildegard, Viriditas was the divine energy that flowed through nature, through the human soul, through the music of the stars. When her community grew, she sought independence from the monks of Disibodenberg. They resisted. Hildegard stood firm. She was officially canonized and named a Doctor of the Church by Pope Benedict XVI, one of only 4 women to receive this title. Eventually, she relocated her nuns to Rupertsberg, founding her own convent, a rare achievement for a woman at the time. It was both metaphor and medicine. Life itself, Hildegard, now in her 50s, began to gain fame as a prophetess and intellectual. Her correspondence is vast. Letters to kings, emperors, abbots, and even Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. Her tone is direct. A voice from the cloister that reached across centuries. She allowed a young nobleman who had been excommunicated to be buried in consecrated ground. When ordered to exhume the body, she refused. She continued writing, composing, and preaching into her 80s. When she died in 1179, it is said that 2 beams of light crossed the sky over her convent. Her nuns buried her beneath the choir. She was forbidden to perform mass or sing the divine office. The silence was a punishment, and a cruel irony for a woman whose life was defined by voice. Sometimes chastising, always grounded in spiritual authority. A highly respected holy woman who would become both her guardian and spiritual mentor. The space they shared was not much larger than a cell. Enclosure was strict. Meals were passed through small hatches. Time was marked not by events, but by prayers. Even in this confined world, young Hildegard's mind wandered far. She began dictating her visions. The result was Sivius, short for Cito Vias Domini. Know the ways of the Lord. From early childhood, she saw things, brilliant lights, shapes, voices. She was a composer. Her collection of sacred music, Symphonia, Harmony, Celestium, Revelatium, contains nearly 80 pieces. Her music defied convention. Soaring melodies, complex phrasing, texts written in her own voice. The chants were meant not just to be sung, but to lift the soul toward the divine. She described them later as the reflection of the living light. But she was cautious. In a world ruled by male theologians, a woman claiming visions walked a narrow line between saint and heretic. By the time she was in her 40s, Hildegard could remain silent no longer. Encouraged by her close companion and scribe, the text is extraordinary. It blends cosmic symbolism with theology, mysticism, and moral instruction. Word spread quickly. But Hildegard was more than a mystic. She also wrote extensively on medicine and nature. Central to all her work was the concept of viriditas, a Latin word meaning greenness or vitality. She did not shy away from conflict. Later in life, Hildegard faced censure. Eventually, the ban was lifted. Centuries later, in 2012, Hildegard's legacy is vast. In theology, music, medicine, feminism, and ecology. But more than anything, she is a voice that dared to sing. Now we turn to a mystery that flickers like candlelight through the annals of Catholic tradition. The incorrupt saints. Imagine walking into a dim chapel tucked within the stone belly of a monastery. There, behind glass or resting quietly beneath embroidered veils, lies the body of someone long departed. It is often taken as a sign of divine favor, a holy life preserved in holy stillness, and yet their flesh is said to remain untouched by time. Incorruptibility, the phenomenon in which a body resists decomposition after death, has been recorded in dozens of saints across centuries. If the body was found to be unusually well preserved, skin soft, joints flexible, hair intact, it was noted as miraculous. Sometimes sweet smells were reported. Her body was said to have remained incorrupt. Exhumed in 1599, witnesses reported that she looked as though she were merely asleep, her skin white, her limbs unbroken. When her body was exhumed multiple times between 1909 and 1925, it was found to be largely intact. Her skin had darkened, but her features were recognizable. Today, she rests in Nevers, France, her face covered with a thin wax mask to preserve her likeness. The desire to see holiness made people more willing to interpret ambiguous signs as miraculous. A waxy texture of skin might be read as divine softness. A lack of odor could be considered a fragrance from heaven, a fragrance of sanctity. Other times, the body was said to remain supple for years. In some cases, rudimentary embalming techniques may have been applied, whether intentionally or through burial practices of the time. Let's explore what that really meant, and what might lie beneath the veils. Rather, it was one sign among many, along with a life of virtue, intercessory power, and the occurrence of posthumous miracles. In modern canonizations, incorruptibility is treated as a point of interest, not definitive proof. Scientific investigation is now often part of the process. The idea of incorruptibility is not new. The sisters reported that her body remained whole, whispering prayers to still faces that seemed to sleep, that the soul, once suffused with divine grace, may echo outward into the very structure of the body. Saint Catherine of Bologna was exhumed after an odor of flowers was said to emanate from her grave. Her body, now seated upright in a glass case, shows little decomposition centuries later. To believe that, for some, time itself paused in reverence. As early as the 3rd century, Christians believed that the bodies of martyrs remained whole and fragrant after death. The connection between holiness and physical preservation took hold, especially in a world where decay was seen as both natural and symbolic of sin. By the medieval period, exhumations were often undertaken to confirm a candidate's sanctity. The Church rarely proclaimed incorruptibility as a standalone miracle. One of the earliest and most famous examples was Saint Cecilia, martyred in the 3rd century. Saint Clare of Assisi, a follower of Saint Francis, is another case. When her tomb was opened in the 13th century, there is also the case of Saint Bernadette Soubirous, the visionary of Lourdes. So what could explain such phenomena? Some scholars suggest environmental conditions. Dry air, cool temperatures, or the type of soil may have contributed to natural preservation. Others argue that simple reverence and confirmation bias played a role. It's worth noting that the Church has grown more cautious over time. And yet, the tradition endures. Pilgrims continue to visit the resting places of incorrupt saints. Some kneel before skeletal hands preserved in velvet-lined relics. Others walk slowly around glass coffins. It is a quiet testament to the medieval imagination. The belief that holiness leaves a mark even on flesh. Whether miracle or mystery, the incorrupt saints remind us of the human longing to touch the eternal. And in the hush of the cloister, that belief found fertile ground. Now, let us turn our gaze toward a different kind of cloistered life. One lived not in poverty or anonymity, but in subtle power, dignity, and sometimes even luxury. Imagine yourself as the abbess of a prosperous medieval convent. The title alone, abbess, carries weight. Many were the daughters or widows of lords, placed in the convent either as a spiritual vocation or a strategic move by their families. Becoming an abbess wasn't always the result of divine calling. It could also be an astute path to power, one that allowed a woman to oversee vast estates, manage household staff. Abbesses could afford books, illuminated manuscripts painstakingly copied in the convent scriptorium. Some wrote their own works, theological treatises, letters, even histories. Correspondence between abbesses and prominent clergy reveals a sharp intellect and a keen sense of political nuance, and correspond with bishops, kings, and even popes, not lavish by courtly standards, who in the 12th century compiled an entire encyclopedia, the Hortus Deliciarum, or Garden of Delights. It contained theology, philosophy, natural science, and intricate illustrations. Her work became a beacon of learning in the convent world. The church was mal-dominated. The rhythm of her life continues, steady, silent, and strong. And abbesses often had to fight to protect their convents from interference. Disputes over property or independence were common. Some abbesses refused to cede power to nearby bishops, leading to years-long feuds that reached as far as Rome. But ample roast meat, they nurtured communities of learning, prayer, and healing. They offered shelter to women in distress, educated young girls of noble birth, and acted as spiritual mothers. 2 generations of sisters, spiced wine, preserved fruits, sweet almond pastries. Guests might include visiting monks, noble women, or a bishop seeking advice. A place where the rose gardens are well tended, the wine cellar is stocked, and parchment ledgers are filled with records of land, tithes, and tenants. It implies not only spiritual responsibility, but political influence, economic power, and social respect. In a world where most women had little agency, the head of a well-endowed abbey could wield real authority, who governed both nuns and monks, and was a key player in the political and religious life of Northumbria. Her abbey was a centre of diplomacy and culture. She would rise before dawn for matins, the early morning prayer, to shape their world, to inscribe their names quietly, but indelibly, into the margins of history. The low murmur of Latin chant drifting from the chapel. In this place, holiness and hierarchy met. A woman could be powerful, pious, and poised, a keeper of souls and steward of land, and lead the sisters in chanting psalms under flickering candlelight. Her veil was of good linen, her shoes sturdy yet well. Her ring, a symbol of spiritual marriage to Christ, might be set with a small stone. She was both a bride of the church and a matron of the estate. Afterward, she might review financial matters with a steward, sign documents, or oversee repairs to the cloister walls. Let us walk slowly through the grounds of such a convent. These lands were often donated by pious nobles seeking favor in heaven. Tenants worked the soil, and the income flowed into the convent coffers. The abbess had to ensure fair dealings, settle disputes, and sometimes even ride out to inspect the fields or meet with local lords. Abbesses in rich convents often came from noble families. The daily life of an abbess was marked by rhythms of both devotion and administration. In wealthy convents, abbesses managed large holdings of land. The clothing of an abbess was modest, but finely made. Unlike their poorer counterparts, there were banquets on feast days, and yet this life was not without its tensions. Still, many women found profound purpose in this role. Take, for instance, the Abbess Herod of Landsberg, or consider Gelfried of Whitby. As you sit in the stillness of this imagined convent, you may hear the distant echo of bells, ... the rustle of robes, ... The abbess stands not merely as a figure of devotion, but as a reminder that even within restrictive systems, women found ways to lead. And as the candle burns low in the quiet convent study, the abbess sets down her quill, closes her ledger, and begins her evening prayers. And so, the bells fall silent, the candle gutters low, to the radiant visions of the mysteries of saints who seemed untouched by death, and the quiet power held by abbesses behind high walls, and the stone walls of the convent return to stillness. We've wandered tonight through the long, cloistered days of medieval women. From the cold austerity of novices at prayer, their world was bounded by silence, by obedience, by ritual. And yet, within those bounds, lives were lived with fierce devotion, quiet resistance, and unwavering in whether they sought the divine through music or meditation, through service or solitude. These women left impressions on the scroll of history, soft, perhaps, but lasting. May their stories settle gently into your thoughts, like drifting ash, like falling snow, like the slow turn of a prayer wheel. And now, in the hush of your own room, the past is far away now. Let it fade softly into darkness. Good night.